Why does everything seem so foggy? I don't remember what happened, but it seems to me that I was tired as never before. Matt slowly came to his senses. His body ached, and he was sure he was dreaming about something, but he could no longer remember what it was. He blinked a few times to clear the fog from his eyes and realized that he was not in his bed. Where am I? He looked around, trying to figure out where he was. It was like a hospital room or something. There were monitors mounted on the wall behind him. The bed had side rails, and he himself felt disgusting. One of the monitors on the wall beeps intermittently, and soon the door to the room opened, revealing a nurse. Seeing that he had regained consciousness, she froze and then smiled widely. "Wow, welcome back, Mr. Jordan. I'll call the doctor now, okay?" "Wait, where am I?" he shouted, but the door had already slammed behind her. Only 2 minutes passed, but they seemed like an eternity. The door opened again, and an elderly man in a white doctor's coat entered the room, followed by the same nurse. "Hello, Mr. Jordan." "Matt, my name is Dr. Stevens. How are you feeling?" "Honestly, doctor, it's been better. I feel terrible and don't understand where I am or how I got here." "Matt, you were in a car accident and suffered a traumatic brain injury. You had surgery to repair your fractures. We carried out all the necessary tests and scans, which is standard procedure for severe head injuries, and you were incredibly lucky. The swelling of the brain was minor. After the swelling subsided, we could only wait for you to decide to return to us. And here you are. I know this will come as a shock, but you were in a coma for almost 4 months." "4 months?" Matt asked in disbelief. "4 months? Where are my wife and children?" Jennifer and Matt met during their sophomore year of college. Both of them had previous relationships. They met in groups of friends at joint events and parties. Matt's best friend, Jim, has been with him since elementary school. Jim was more outgoing, but they balanced each other out well. Jennifer had a couple of friends that she hung out with, but she hadn't had a close friend since her roommate Rachel moved out when they were in ninth grade. Matt was a little shy, so Jennifer was the first to ask him out on a date to watch a movie. He liked her very much, but he was glad that she made the first step. They quickly became a couple, and by their third year, they were living together in an off-campus apartment, where they lived until graduation. Upon graduation, Matt earned a degree in computer science with a minor in business, and Jennifer earned a degree in nursing, ranking in the top 5% of the class. They decided to move to Chicago since the city was about halfway between their families. Jennifer got a job in the trauma department of the largest city hospital, and Matt got a job in a large corporation. They were very busy, but always found time for each other. They were best friends and loving partners, which was obvious to everyone around them. A year into their marriage, Matt finally decided to propose. They were having dinner at Jennifer's favorite restaurant and had just finished their main course. Matt got down on one knee and said, "Jennifer, you are the love of my life. You make me whole. Will you marry me?" He opened the box hidden behind his back, which contained a dazzling diamond ring. Jennifer had tears in her eyes and nodded and said, "Yes, I love you, Matt." There were almost no indifferent people in the hall. Many were wiping away tears, and applause was heard at the tables. The couple hugged tightly. They finished dessert and went home to celebrate. This night became special for both of them, full of tenderness and passion. Jennifer and her mother, as well as her future mother-in-law, began preparing for the wedding. Matt was involved too, testing out variations of the cake and helping out with small details like napkins, but he left the big questions up to Jennifer, offering advice when asked. On the wedding day, both were nervous, but it was the best day of their lives. Matt waited eagerly at the altar as Jennifer's father walked her down the aisle. She looked like an angel descended from heaven. She was so beautiful. They exchanged vows, and after being announced as Mr. and Mrs. Jordan, headed to the banquet hall for an evening of fun and celebration. Of course, they left early to start their honeymoon. Their parents organized a 3-day trip to one of the Grand Cayman Islands in the Bahamas. Their bungalow was absolutely fabulous, and the weather was perfect. They only had peace, quiet, and time for each other. The first night, they didn't even leave the room, ordering food to the room. It was the perfect start to their married life. They were so in love that they spent the first hour just enjoying each other's company, touching, kissing, and exploring. At the end of 3 days, they were exhausted but happy. Returning home, they started a new life together. In the first year, they were practically inseparable. They spent every free moment together going to the movies or clubs. A year later, Jennifer became pregnant, and their daughter, Sydney, was born 9 months later. They left the house less, but still found time to go out together while their daughter was growing up. A year later, Jennifer became pregnant again and gave birth to their eldest son, Stephen. 9 months later, their youngest son, Thomas, was born. After his birth, Matt had a procedure done to ensure they would not have any more children in the future. Over the years, despite demanding jobs and 3 children, they still found time for each other. These moments became especially valuable. Although they were no longer teenagers, they still loved each other passionately, spending at least 1 or 2 nights a week alone, usually sending the children to their grandparents for sleepovers. By the time Sydney turned 17, she was already in her senior year of school, and the boys, 16 and 15 years old, were in 10th and 9th grades, respectively. Sydney enjoyed sports, but most of all, she loved studying and spending time with several friends, often staying in her room. Stephen was a football player, and Thomas, known to his friends as Tommy, was a skinny basketball player who played for the school's junior team. Jennifer was still working at the hospital, but she had been the head nurse on a shift in the emergency department for 2 years. Matt changed jobs a few years later due to problems at his old place related to harassment from female colleagues. Now he worked for a small consulting company that temporarily helped large corporations. Matt was involved in an accident on his way home from a client in a nearby town. This could have happened to anyone, but he was unlucky. He arrived at a four-way intersection, looked both ways, and saw a truck approaching. It seemed to be slowing down, and Matt decided to cross the intersection. However, the truck driver did brake, but fell asleep at the wheel. He didn't even notice Matt's car crossing the intersection and crashed into it at full speed. Matt was taken to the hospital on a stretcher with a neck brace. The truck driver suffered injuries, but minor ones, as his body was relaxed due to his state of half asleep. Police later determined he was slightly intoxicated and arrested him on suspicion of driving while intoxicated and possible assault. Matt was taken to the hospital, where Jennifer was on duty. She was in a terrible state, torn between tears for her husband and the need to direct the actions of the medical staff. She finally gave up and went to the waiting room, where she sat, sobbing and crying. Several hours passed. At that time, her children and both sets of grandparents were waiting with her. A doctor in a surgical suit came out to them and gave them mixed news. Matt survived, but was put into an induced coma to reduce brain swelling. In 2 days, the medications will begin to leave the body, and everything will depend on Matt whether he can come out of the coma. Jennifer, I couldn't believe it. I know I was in shock for a long time, but it's still hard for me to comprehend it. My love, my soulmate, he was breathing, but he was not there. I sat at his bedside for the first few days, even after the drugs that kept him in a coma were taken off. I held his hand and told him how the kids and all of us were doing. After a week, I had to return home to the children, but I continued to visit him every evening, staying on the weekends as much as I could. After a month of such visits, I still came, but less often, because I needed to stay home for the sake of the children. They missed their dad as much as I missed my husband. Matt's best friend Jim was also a big help. He came to help with the children's lessons and activities. On those evenings when our parents couldn't help, Jim stayed with the kids while I visited Matt. I now understand that it was then that my fall began. I didn't know what was going on, but at that moment I needed all the help I could get. Without Matt, I was on the verge of being overwhelmed every day, with no outlet for my grief. About 2 months later, Jim invited me to dinner on a Friday night. The kids were going to spend the night with their friends, and I thought I should really get out of the house. We went to a nice restaurant that Matt and I loved. Even now, I realize that everything in my life still revolves around Matt. God, how I needed him. This is one of Matt and I's favorite places, I said. I've only been here once, but the place is really good. I know it's hard for you right now, but remember, I'm always ready to listen if you need someone to lean on, Jim replied. We talked throughout dinner about the past, things we liked, and of course Matt. Jim tried to console me by telling me that Matt was one of the strongest people he knew and would get better. After dinner, he drove me home. At the door, he gave me a long, comforting hug. When we released our embrace, he suddenly kissed me lightly on the lips and wished me good night. The kiss was awkward, to say the least, and I quickly walked into the house, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know how to feel about this, and I tried to avoid Jim for the next week by not answering his calls. He sent me a message apologizing for that kiss, assuring me that he just wanted to support me during this difficult time. Finally, a week later, I answered his call and agreed to meet for lunch. I think there was a silent agreement between us that no such situations would happen again. Nevertheless, we had a good conversation. It was nice to talk to an adult who understood how much I missed Matt. We agreed to meet again in a few days. This time, Jim invited me to a small bistro where we just had sandwiches. Again, everything was friendly and harmless. After lunch, he invited me to dinner and a movie with other friends on Friday. I thought a little fun wouldn't hurt me. The previous Thursday evening, I went to see Matt. I sat with him, holding his hand, and told him about my love and how much I missed him. Darling, I miss you so much. I love you so much, and I don't know how much longer I can stand this without you, I whispered to him. I continued. Jim tries to help, but he will never replace you. You are my life. He lay there, breathing, and suddenly I felt a sharp surge of anger. How could he leave me alone in this state? But after a moment, the anger gave way to deep sadness and guilt for these thoughts. Here he is, the love of my life, in a coma, and I dare to be angry with him. Honey, I beg you, please come back to me. I can't cope without you, I whispered. I returned home and got ready for tomorrow evening. On Friday, after work, I took the kids to my parents and started getting ready. Jim met me at the restaurant where we had reserved a table. Where is everyone else? I asked. They should come, I hope, he replied. We drank a little, but the others never showed up. After receiving the message, Jim said that they had problems with the children and they would not be able to come. Maybe we can reschedule the meeting then, I suggested, already getting ready to leave. Well, since we're here, we can just enjoy dinner and make arrangements with them for another time, Jim suggested. I knew I should have left, but I agreed to stay. Dinner was delicious, although everything seemed empty without Matt. I felt lost and Jim did everything he could to support me. I really miss Matt too. But I'm glad I can be here with you, he said. I think I'll skip the movie today, okay, Jim? I said. Of course, no problem. I'll walk you to the car. We walked to the car, and when I turned to thank him, he was too close again. He hugged me. His hug was warm and comforting. For a moment, I let the feeling take over me. When he leaned towards my lips, I froze for a moment, but then I kissed him myself. The kiss was filled with passion, and I was lost in this moment. But after a minute, I pulled away, shocked by my action. Sorry, Jim, I shouldn't have done that. I have to go, I said. Forgive me too. I shouldn't have done that, he replied, retreating. He turned around, got into his car, and, waving his hand at me, drove off. I quickly got into my car and drove home, feeling disgusting. How could I? How could I kiss my husband's best friend? When I got home, I immediately went to the bedroom and promised myself that I would never be alone with Jim again. I also decided that I should visit Matt more often and remind myself how much I love him. I spent the next few days at Matt's bedside, holding his hand and telling him about my love. I returned to work again, and in the evenings I took the children to visit their dad. It was difficult, but I tried to cope. A week later, it was Sydney's birthday. It was her 18th birthday, and we were having a big party. I knew that Matt would miss this important day, and it filled me with sadness. but I tried to be strong for the sake of my daughter and other children. The party went great. Sydney was happy, her friends were having a great time. My little girl is now an adult, at least legally. Jim was also at the party. He kept aloof, but at some point came up and said, "You should be proud of Sydney, she's a wonderful girl." "I'm very proud of her," I replied. He left soon after, and the rest of the guests began to leave as well. By nightfall, only Sydney and her best friend Mary remained, who stayed overnight. On Friday evening, a couple of days later, the kids and I were having dinner when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any guests, so I went to open it. Jim stood on the threshold. "Jim, what are you doing here?" I asked. "I thought you needed a little break from everything." "Just to talk," he replied. I thought about it. Maybe a little walk would actually do me good. I asked Sydney to look after the brothers and said I'd be back in a couple of hours. Jim took us to a local pub, and we sat at a table in the corner. I drank a little more than I should have, but I still knew I should have been careful. After a couple of hours, he suggested we dance. We went out onto the dance floor and danced to music from the jukebox. While dancing slowly, he put his arm around my waist, pulling me closer. I knew I should have stopped him, but his hug was so warm, so enveloping. His touch made me feel strangely excited, and despite everything, I gave in to the moment. After the dance, we went back to the table to pack up, and I thought he was going to take me home. But he instead drove to an empty city park and parked in the far corner. I felt uneasy, but before I could say anything, he reached out to me. His hand slid softly into my hair and the other onto my thigh. He leaned towards me, his face so close, and instead of pushing him away, I closed my eyes and let him kiss me. I cheated on my husband. But it wasn't love-filled sex like with Matt. We were just having sex. What did I just do? I quickly cleaned myself up and quietly asked to be taken home. When we stopped at my house, I said, "Jim, don't come again. Never." He looked upset, but nodded and drove away. I slowly walked up the steps to the door. A storm was raging inside me. How could I do this? How could I betray Matt? I vowed that I would be the best mother I could be for my children, and that I would do anything to make it up to my husband if he ever woke up. When I entered, the children immediately noticed my condition. "You look tired, Mom. Are you very rested?" Sydney asked with a smile. "Yes, dear. I drank a little more than I should have, but luckily Jim drove me home. I think I'll go take a shower and go to bed. Thanks for looking after the brothers." I lied to her, and I felt disgusted that I was deceiving my daughter. The next day, I did everything possible to return to normal life. In the morning, as usual, I took the children to classes, prepared dinner, and tried to distract myself from my shame. But this burden did not let me go. And then the phone rang. "Hello, this is Jennifer." "Mrs. Jordan, this is Dr. Stevens. Your husband has woken up." I dropped the phone and sank to the floor, crying. Were these tears of joy or fear of what I had done? Matt. I woke up, but was still very weak. The doctor said they have contacted my family, and they will be here soon. I still had little understanding of what had happened other than what they told me about the car accident. I wanted to know the rest from Jennifer. The door opened, and the children rushed into the room, followed by Jennifer. They all hugged me, almost crushing me. "Be careful, guys. Dad is fine, but if you continue like this, he might stop being him," I joked. Jennifer came closer, sat down next to me, took my hand, and tears flowed from her eyes. "Oh God, I'm so glad you're with us again, Matt," she said, tears rolling down her cheeks. She was so beautiful, just as I remembered her the day I first saw her. She held my hand tightly until the children let me go and the doctor entered the room. He explained that after 4 months in a coma, I would need rehabilitation to regain my strength. But the good news was that there were no serious consequences from the head injury, and in a couple of days I would be allowed to go home. However, I will need help moving until I regain my strength. By that time, our parents had already gathered in the room, standing a little to the side. Their faces glowed with happy smiles. They came closer, and each took turns hugging me, expressing their joy. It was obvious that they were all worried about me, but now they were glad to see me conscious. Jennifer asked if the kids could stay at her parents' house overnight so she could spend the evening with me. I realized how much she missed her and agreed. After that, everyone said goodbye, promising to visit me in the following days. When everyone left, Jennifer sat down next to my bed, took my hand in hers, and looked at me as if I was the last person on earth. There was fatigue in her eyes, and I noticed it immediately. "Darling, when was the last time you slept properly?" I asked her. She chuckled quietly and, with a slight sob, said, "Every evening, but it's not the same without you. I slept here for the first week, but then I had to return home for the sake of the children. As soon as I'm discharged, we'll all go home together," I said, feeling guilty for leaving her alone. "Forgive me for not being there." She put her finger to my lips, interrupting me. "You have nothing to apologize for," she said. She seemed to want to say something else, but fell silent, her gaze darkening. After a moment, she looked at me again, smiling, and leaned down to kiss me. After the kiss, she said, "I love you, Matt. God, how I missed you. I promise you will know how much I love you every day for the rest of your life. As soon as you get better," she added with a mischievous smile. I was still a little alarmed by her change of mood, but decided not to say anything. She had been through so much, and I knew she needed time. "Listen, did Jim come to see me while I was in a coma? Did he visit me?" I asked. Her face darkened, and she answered with difficulty. "Yes, he came, but I haven't seen him for a long time." She sat down next to me, put her head on my hand, and quietly whispered, "Good night, dear. I love you." "Good night, Jen." "I love you more," I replied, feeling the warmth of her touch. We fell asleep and woke up when the sun rose outside the window. It seemed that the day promised to be good, and I hoped that they would let me go home. After the nurse checked on me and the doctor came in to examine me, they said I could go home, but would need several therapy sessions and a wheelchair until my strength returned and I could walk without assistance. They took me to the car where my wife was waiting to take me home. When we arrived, she said that the children were at school now, but would return later. She took the day off to spend the day with me. "Let me know if you need anything, okay, honey?" "I'll take a shower and be out soon," she said. "No problem, I'm tired, so I think I'll just lie down for a while." She took me to the bedroom and helped me into bed. She drew the curtains to keep the room dark and then undressed to take a shower. She still looked angelic even after giving birth to 3 children. I will never get tired of admiring her beautiful body and let her know about it. "Honey, if you don't get in the shower right now, I might have to hurt myself somehow just to please this celestial body," I said. She laughed a little and replied, "Perhaps I will accept your offer later." She went into the bathroom and turned on the shower. I wanted to stay awake in anticipation of the therapy session, but I was too tired and immediately fell asleep. I woke up from her light snoring. Her head was lying on my chest. I didn't want to wake her up, but I needed to go to the bathroom, so I gave her a little nudge to wake her up. She woke up abruptly and looked at me strangely, then said, "Sorry, I had a bad dream. Do you need something, dear?" "Yes, I need to go to the toilet," I laughed. She stood up and helped me walk to the bathroom, supporting me while I relieved myself. We had been married for a long time, so it didn't really bother me. We went back to bed after washing our hands. There were about 2 hours left before the children arrived, and I decided to test my physical capabilities while they were gone. I turned to my wife, leaned over and kissed her, and we made love. I raised her head and looked into her wet eyes. "What happened, dear?" It was incredible. "I know. It was wonderful, and I love you more than anything in the world. But Matt, I thought I was going to lose you." At these words, she burst into tears again. I tried to rise up to sit up a little while she sat on top of me, still wrapping her body around me. I pushed her hair aside and said, "Everything will be fine now, dear. I'm home." I smiled and kissed her. When she didn't kiss back, I pulled away to look into her eyes. Something was clearly wrong, and it started to bother me. "What? Honey, you scare me," I said. She lowered her eyes for a minute, still sobbing, and then said quietly, "I'm so afraid of losing you, Matt." She got off me and sat down at the foot of the bed. After a short silence, she continued, "I slept with Jim. Forgive me." At these words, she covered her face with her hands and began to cry harder than I had ever seen. What can I say? I had no words. I just sat there, processing what I heard to make sure I heard correctly. Questions suddenly began to pop up in my head, and they immediately burst out. When? What the hell? Did you slept with Jim? A minute passed, but she didn't answer, and I started to get even angrier. "Answer me," I shouted. She flinched from my scream, looked at me with frightened and tear-stained eyes, and answered. It was the lowest moment in my life. "I have no excuses that matter. This happened a couple of nights ago in his car. My God," she burst into tears again. This was just the beginning of a long and sad process if she kept crying like that. Apparently, if you haven't figured it out yet, my wife was a crybaby. She cried for any reason. My anger eased a little for a moment as I watched the love of my life suffer. It's a shame that my own pain only got worse. I would have gotten up and left the room, but I was too weak, so I just jerked around and turned towards the wall. I think she didn't know what to do, so she got up, went to the bathroom, cleaned herself up, took a pillow and left the bedroom, whispering on the way out, "I love you." After she left, the room became very empty, and I spent one of the most restless nights of my life. When I woke up, I rolled over and saw my wife sitting on the edge of the bed, covering her face with her hands, shaking with quiet sobs. I had no words to console her, so I also remained silent. After a few minutes, I began to move, indicating that I was awake, and swung my legs off the bed. She also stood up and came over to help me up. Awkward or not, I needed help getting around until I had a few more therapy sessions, so I let her help. She led me to the bathroom and turned on the water so I could take a bath. Then she left me alone so I could take a bath. I sat in the hot water, immersed in the warmth, and thinking about what I should say to the children. How do you tell them that their mother betrayed their father in the worst possible way while he was in a coma? How do I say that the woman I loved most in the world may no longer be my wife? I didn't have answers to these questions. I just soaked in hot water until I was washed. When I finished, I tried to get up myself, and although with difficulty, I was able to get out to the edge of the bath and dry myself. I managed to get dressed, but I couldn't put on my socks without help. "Jen, can you help me?" I called. When she walked in, I handed her the socks, and she smiled faintly before she knelt down to put them on. After that, she helped me walk to the kitchen and sit at the table while she served breakfast for me and the children. Everyone ate in a hurry and then ran out the door to catch the bus. After they left, silence reigned in the house for some time. None of us knew what to say. Finally, she laid her head on her folded hands on the table and burst into tears again. I got up with difficulty and went back to the bedroom. I made it to the corridor by holding on to the wall, but several times I had to stop and rest. Our family photographs taken at different times hung on the walls. As I looked at them, I also started to cry a little as I moved on. Finally, I made it to the bed and almost fell on my back. I sat down, but didn't know what to do next. I just stared blankly at the family photo on the wall. I knew that logically I had to do something about this situation with my wife. The problem was that I didn't want to do it. Jennifer, I don't know how long I sat crying at the table. I've been doing this a lot lately, but it hasn't helped me cope with the situation. Whether just a few minutes or several hours had passed, I didn't know. I understood only one thing. I had lost him. The person I spent my whole life with, whom I loved more than anyone in the world, was no longer there, and it was entirely my fault. How could I fix this? How could she even try to atone for her guilt? I heard him walking down the corridor, and in the middle of the way he also began to cry. How could I hurt this man? I, a reliable, loving wife and mother of 3 children. How could I? If I have to leave, I will have to do everything possible to show him how much I love him, and that everything that happened was not his fault. I got up to help him, but he had already reached the bedroom. When I reached the door, he was sitting on the edge of the bed and looking at the wall at our family photo. "How could you do this to us?" he asked, almost in a whisper, like a ghost. "Matt, I'm a terrible person. I don't fully understand it myself, but I want you to know that this has nothing to do with you. I love you so much. God, it was difficult, as I expected. I can't fix this, but I sincerely wish I could." He didn't answer, just continued to look at the photo. I think he was in shock. I walked over and sat next to him on the edge of the bed, hugging him from behind and resting my head on his back. I was still crying and his shirt was starting to get wet. I decided that I had to take full responsibility for what happened, so I stood up a little and began to speak again. "I'll talk to the children when they return. It's not your fault, and you don't have to deal with it." I had to sniffle a lot, but fortunately I didn't cry out loud anymore. "Matt, please believe me when I say that I love you more than anything in the world, even more than myself." "How can I? I used to think that you loved me more than anything in the world, and I want to believe it now, but how? All I know is that I love you so much it hurts, and now it just hurts." After that, he was silent for a long time, and then asked to be left alone in the room so that he could sleep. I left, but before that I said again, "I love you." Then I closed the door and went to clean the kitchen as best I could. I decided that I had to continue to be the best wife and mother I could, despite all the terrible things I had done. When the kids got home after school, I said we needed to talk, and it was important. First, I wanted to talk to Sydney alone, and then to all three of them together. I followed Sydney into her room and, closing the door behind me, told her a shortened version of what happened with Jim, avoiding unnecessary details, adding that I told her father about it this morning. By the time I finished, her face was red, and she looked like she was ready to explode. "How could you? Mom, why the hell did you get the idea that this is normal? You just destroyed our family, how could you?" She sat down on the bed and burst into tears, repeating, "How could you? How could you? I ruined everything. I know that. I'm more sorry than you will ever know. There is nothing I can do to take away the pain I caused your father." "Yes, that's exactly it, Mom. What are you going to tell Steve and Tommy?" She continued to express her emotions, which was probably for the best. I didn't have the slightest idea how to fix the situation with my family, but I wasn't going to give up. "Darling, I know I've messed everything up terribly. I'll try to be honest with the boys, but I won't go into too much detail. Please understand that I love you all very much, and will do my best to try to make things right if possible." She just snorted, stood up, opened the door, and motioned for me to leave. I walked out, and she closed the door behind me with a loud bang. I felt like a death row inmate about to be executed as I walked into the living room, where the boys were watching TV and waiting for me. "Mom, where is Sydney?" asked Stephen. "I thought you wanted to talk to us all together." "I don't think she needs to be present at this conversation." "We've already discussed everything," I answered. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the inevitable violent reaction that was to follow. "Boys, there is no easy way to say this other than just telling the truth. I made a huge mistake and cheated on your father. Now I hope." "What?" they shouted almost in unison, interrupting me. "Have you cheated on your dad?" "Mom, why? Why did you do this?" asked my eldest son. "Yes, Mom, you always said that you loved Dad more than yourself," Tommy added. At this point, I already began to cry, realizing that all the pain that was just beginning in my family was my fault. Or rather, mine and that bastard Jim's, but still, I was the one who allowed it to happen. I started paying off my debts. Yes, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. I sincerely apologize that you, innocent of anything, have to go through this. I just hope that one day you can forgive me and Dad, and I can find a way to make things right. At this point, I couldn't hold back my tears. I got up, hugged the boys, and went into the guest room. I closed the door, curled up on the bed, and didn't even bother getting under the covers. For what? Why did I turn out to be so weak? The shame of what I did will haunt me for the rest of my life, but for the sake of my children, I must be strong. However, today I allowed myself to cry. I don't know how I fell asleep, but I fell asleep on my pillow, sobbing. The sleep was restless at best. Tomorrow would probably be even harder than today, and I was no longer looking forward to the future. Matt, reality really sucks, at least mine does. What should I do now? The woman I loved more than anything in the world, and who I thought loved me just as much, slept with my ex-best friend Jim. How can we survive this? Can I survive this? First, I need to improve my health, and then give Jim a good whack. How dare this bastard? He was supposed to be my best friend. Instead, he took the first opportunity he could while I was in a coma to sleep with my wife. How can I recover if I can't stand the woman who should be helping me with this? I tried to get up, but could only sit up, leaning on the head of the bed. I still couldn't get up and walk without help, so I had no choice but to ask for help. All this was starting to bore me. Jen, Sydney, someone help me please, I shouted into the house. At first no one responded, but then I heard a muffled response from the corridor. Now, Dad, I'll come, the daughter answered. She came into the room, and I put my arm around her shoulders so she could help me up and to the bathroom. As we walked through the doorway, I caught a glimpse of Jen standing in the hallway, her face streaked with tears and her hand covering her mouth. I might feel sorry for her, but she herself deserved it. Sydney helped me sit on the toilet and then came out of the bathroom to let me finish. When I was ready, I somehow pulled up my pants, flushed, and called her back to help me go to the sink and wash my hands and face. We went out into the living room together, where she helped me sit down at the table and then went to the kitchen. Today was the first day of my new, damn difficult life, and I was already exhausted. Honey, could you make me? Oh, forget it, I began, but then I saw that she was already pouring coffee into the coffee maker. Thank you, I said. When the coffee was ready, she came and sat opposite me. I saw that she wanted to say something, but she looked clearly unsure. Sydney, yesterday was a hard day. Do you want to talk about it? I asked. She paused, looking at her hands folded on the table, and then looked up at me. Dad, I want to stay with you. If you and Mom get divorced, I want to stay here with you. I didn't know what to say. My heart was filled with the warmth I needed now, and my eyes became slightly moist. She does too. I really don't know what will happen next, but I will do everything I can for you children. You are my life. At that moment, my boys came into the room and started making themselves some cereal for breakfast. I was sitting drinking coffee, and my wife came out of the bedroom, already dressed for work. She still looked unhappy, but she smiled for the sake of the children. She seemed to want to say something, but couldn't. In the end, she only squeezed out a quick, "I love you," and left the house. After her car pulled away, the kids finished eating, started getting ready for school, and Sydney helped me back to the bedroom. My mom was supposed to come by later and help while the kids were at school. Lying in bed watching TV, I began to fall into my dark thoughts again. I had too much time to get stuck in my own feelings. I used to think that I had a good life before that accident. I had a wife whom I loved more than anything in the world and 3 wonderful children. Where did I go wrong? Before I could completely lose myself in dark thoughts, I heard the front door slam and my mother called. Matt, where are you? I'm here. In the bedroom, Mom, I shouted back. She entered the room and sat on the edge of the bed. Son, I know you're going through a difficult period right now, but you'll get through it. I'm here to help you. She didn't yet know what Jennifer had done. When I didn't answer right away, she looked at me carefully. She squinted as only mothers can and asked, "What's really bothering you? You look like someone died." That's probably true, Mom. My marriage is most likely dead. I lost my breath and couldn't continue right away. I'm not one to cry often, but the pain was almost unbearable. Jennifer cheated on me, Mom. She admitted it last night. I have no idea what to do next, but she broke my heart. The boys seem to be holding on, but Sydney is simply killed. How could she do this to us? Mom was silent for a while, then answered, "I'm so sorry, son. I would never have thought that she was capable of this." I know you and Jen have always loved each other very much. It was clear from your looks. Son, I don't know what advice to give you, except one. No matter what happens, your father and I will always be there for you and the children." She stood up, kissed my forehead, and left the room. A few minutes later, I heard her preparing soup in the kitchen. Why do all mothers think that hot soup can fix everything? Maybe this really is a universal cure for colds, comas, and even a broken heart. The soup, by the way, turned out to be very tasty. It really warmed me up, even if only for a short time. When Mom came to pick up the bowl, she said she would watch TV in the living room while I rested. I put my head on the pillow and fell asleep. I woke up hearing the sound of the front door closing. I heard my mother's voice. She seemed to be talking to Jen. My son told me, "I'm very disappointed in you, Jennifer. Now it's time for me to go cook dinner for my husband. Tomorrow I will come at the same time. Goodbye." I didn't hear a single word from Jen until Mom left the house. Then my wife came into the bedroom to see how I was doing. She still looked terrible, like she'd been run over by a truck, and I wasn't feeling any better. She placed her bag on the dresser and sat on the edge of the bed. At first, she didn't say anything, just looked at me. I could see she was about to say something, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear it. "How do you feel?" she finally asked. "Tomorrow you have your first therapy session. The kids are about to start spring break, so they'll be home." "I feel disgusted. Why are you asking?" I snapped. "Matt," she began, sniffling, "I've been crying a lot lately, and you're right and wrong at the same time. I really care about you, but that didn't stop me from ruining everything. How can I prove to you that I still love you with all my heart?" "Jen, I don't know," I replied. "Right now, I just can't think about anything. I need time to come to my senses. Maybe you should stay away from me at least for a while." I could see that my words hurt her, but at the moment I didn't care. She stood up and headed to the closet to change out of her work clothes. When she was left in only her underwear, I suddenly felt how my body began to betray me. I began to get excited. I looked down at my reaction and mentally cursed. Traitor. Jen stood by the closet, sorting through things, and it reminded me of our first years of marriage. Then, in our small two-room apartment, she wore underwear almost every evening. She was much more relaxed then. No, she was not some kind of walker, but she was the one who initiated intimacy so often. We then had sex almost every evening. After our daughter was born, this became less frequent, which is probably normal for parents, but it's still hard. I shook my head to rid myself of these thoughts. Now I had no time for nostalgia. Her presence in the room and in the house in general made it impossible for me to concentrate. I didn't know what to do next, but I was definitely angry at her for betraying my so-called friend Jim. I decided, when I recover, I will kill this bastard. That's for sure. Honestly, if I had to make a decision right now, I might want to get even with Jen. Whether I love her or not, her cheating drove me crazy. But then I thought about the children. If they lost their mother and I ended up in prison, what would happen to them? I sighed heavily and Jen turned to me. She finished getting dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt and left the room without saying anything. A few minutes later, Sydney came in to check on me. It's funny, I didn't even hear the kids get home. "How are you, Dad? Need anything?" she asked. "Oh, I'm glad to see you, honey. Yes, can you help me up? I want to spend the evening with you in the living room, not lie here." "Of course, Dad." She helped me get up and go out into the corridor. I felt that I was slowly starting to get stronger, but I was still unstable. It was a miracle that I was able to get to bed on my own yesterday. I spent the evening in the living room with the children, listening to them talk about their day and watching TV. Jen stayed in the kitchen, where she cleaned. I tried to focus on the children, although deep down I wanted to hug and strangle my wife at the same time. When the kids wished me luck at therapy tomorrow and went off to do their homework, I realized I was hungry. Jen usually cooked dinner, but I couldn't smell anything cooking. This surprised me despite the last couple of days. I called her. "Jen." She came out of the kitchen and stood in front of me. There was a different look on her face than what I had seen since her confession. This time she looked sad but determined. "I talked to my parents," she said. "I told them that we had problems. I decided that it would be better if I stayed with them for now. I know you need help now more than ever, but I'm afraid it shouldn't be me." I saw her eyes fill with tears, but she tried not to cry. I couldn't find words to console her, so I just said, "Perhaps it will really be better this way." I have never felt as awkward in my life as I have these last few days. "You still have to call and come to see the children." She just nodded, turned, and went into the bedroom. A few minutes later, she came out with a suitcase and said that she was going to say goodbye to the children. After she had been in each room and said goodbye to each of the children, she walked over to me, leaned over, and gave me a quick kiss on the forehead before I could protest. "I love you, Matt," she said. "Please remember this. Good night." With that, she left the house and drove away. I was still confused when she left, but I figured it would give me time to cool down and think about what was happening. I really didn't know if I could ever forgive her, let alone stay married to her. Jennifer. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life, but I knew I had to give him some space. I clearly saw that my presence in the house would only remind him of everything, clouding his judgment. I had been crying a lot lately, but it seemed like I had no tears left now. Although, apparently, there was still a little left, because when I arrived at my parents' house and my mother came out to hug me on the porch, I cried again. Dad came out and took my suitcase and purse, and we all went into the house. We barely spoke that evening, but it was probably the worst night of sleep since the accident. I had nightmares about Matt and the funeral, about Jim and that terrible night. I woke up sweating before the alarm went off and couldn't get back to sleep. I sat and thought about the last few days and where I had gone wrong. Obviously, sex with Jim is something that should never have happened, but how did it come to this? I began to think about the time I spent with him and gradually realized that he was manipulating me from the beginning. Why did I let this snake get close to me? Why was I so blind as to not see that he didn't want to be my friend at all? Instead of helping me overcome my difficulties, he wanted to take advantage of my weakness. I didn't have the answers at that moment, but I felt like I had to write down these questions so I could try to figure them out later. I had to find answers if there was any chance of saving my marriage and family. I got out of bed and started getting ready for the workday. If I'm already awake, it's better to go to work and take my mind off things. If there is a place on earth where a person can be constantly busy, it is a hospital. After grabbing coffee at Starbucks, I headed to the trauma center. I told the head nurse that I could start work early so she could go home early. I sat down at my desk and looked at all the current patients and the nursing shift for the day. I haven't often had the opportunity to work with night shift nurses, but the early morning hours are usually calm and pleasant. There were quite a few patients in the wards today, but nothing that suggested a crazy day. Many people do not realize that the emergency department is a very difficult place to maintain order. Most of the time, we are simply responding to the flow of patients that come to us. I'm not complaining, I just sometimes wish there was more structure to each day. It may be time to think about looking for a job in a regular medical practice with normal hours. By the time the sun rose and the morning passed, I hardly thought about the situation at home, and before I knew it, it was time to leave. At the end of my shift, I spoke with Donna. She was a little plump and older than me, but one of the kindest people I knew. We worked together for several years, and I valued her friendship. "If you are having problems, why don't you try seeking counseling?" she suggested. When Doug and I were having problems early in our marriage, we went to a marriage therapist. "It won't hurt, will it?" "Thank you for listening to me and being a good friend, Donna. I'll think about it." I quickly hugged her, and we both went home. As I walked to the parking lot, I heard someone call me. "Jennifer, wait." I turned around and saw that bastard Jim. What else did he want? "Jim, what the hell do you want? Haven't you done enough damage?" "Sorry, Jen, but I just couldn't stay away. I know that Matt has already come to his senses, but you should know that I have wanted you for a long time." "I don't care. Leave me alone, or I'll call the police and apply for an order of protection." With these words, I ran to the car and got into it. Jim screamed how much he needed me, but I just left. This man had the audacity to try to contact me again after everything that had happened. The first thing that came to my mind was to call Matt. But what will I tell him? I knew he deserved the truth, but would he want to talk to me now? Would he believe me or think I slept with Jim again? I decided to go back to my parents and call to talk to him and the children. When I got home, I told Mom and Dad to tell Jim if he showed up or called that he could go to hell. Without going into details, I went to my room and my mother followed. It was time for me to confess to my parents. "Mom, I did a terrible thing. I cheated on my husband." "With this Jim, I understand," she asked sharply. I just nodded. I saw the disappointment in her eyes as she sat next to me on the bed and hugged me. No matter how serious the mistakes of their children, mothers always take care of them. Apparently, that's just the way the world works. I won't go into details, but I told him after that it was the biggest mistake of my life and demanded that he stay away from me forever. As I was leaving work tonight, he tried to stop me in the parking lot, but I told him to get the hell out. What should I do now? "Jennifer, I can't tell you what to do. You have to determine this for yourself. The only thing I can advise is to never lie or hide anything from Matt. The key to our marriage has always been communication. Everything wasn't always perfect for us, God knows, but we stayed together because we love each other and always discuss everything." Mom's words almost brought a new flood of tears from me, but I restrained myself. Every word she said added a new burden to my shoulders. I hugged her and asked her to leave me alone. I took out my mobile phone and opened the house number. I stared at him for about 10 minutes before I got up the courage to press the call button. Finally, I pressed the green button and the phone started ringing. Sydney's daughter answered the second ring. "Hello, Jordan family," she said. "Hello, honey, it's Mom. How are you?" I tried to hold on and sound cheerful. After a pause, she replied, "I'm fine, Mom. What do you need? How's Dad? Has he returned from therapy yet? My grandmother took him in the morning while I was at school, but he is now at home in the bedroom. Mom." She hesitated. Then she suddenly blurted out, "I hate you," and hung up. I just looked at the phone for a while and then put it down. I knew I deserved it, but it still hurt a lot. My own children hated me. My husband hates me. And probably on some level my parents were angry at me too. How I wish this nightmare would end and I would wake up in the world that was before Matt's accident. I went back to bed and cried for a long time, wanting to just stop everything. Matt begins therapy, hoping for a speedy recovery. After the kids left for school, my mom arrived to help me get ready and take me to therapy. She was incredible in helping me through my toughest moments. We got to the hospital and checked into the physical therapy room. They rolled out a wheelchair for me so that I wouldn't try to walk to the office on my own. While we waited, I thought about my wife. Somewhere in this building, she sat at her large desk in the minding her own business. I wonder if she thought about me while she was here. I sat in a chair, thinking about children. Thank God for my daughter. She helps me now more than anyone her age should. I know she's almost an adult, but it still bothers me that she has to grow up so quickly. The nurse came out and invited us into one of the examination rooms. We waited a little before the doctor who operated on me came. "Hello, Matt. I'm very happy to see you recovering so well. I wanted to talk to you about your head injury and check how you are doing. After this, therapy specialists will come to examine you and prescribe a rehabilitation program. So, let's start with the bad news. You had inflammation of the frontal lobe of the brain when you were admitted to the hospital. That's why we kept you under medical anesthesia to reduce the swelling. To be honest, you recovered from this almost at record speed, but you still couldn't come to your senses for a long time. Each head injury is unique, so I can only give you general guidelines. There is a chance that you may have problems with short-term memory for a while, or maybe not at all. This may mean that events in the last few days or even weeks before the accident will be more difficult to remember than older memories. Now the good news, you have virtually no damage to the occipital lobe or spine. Once the swelling subsided, your brain function was almost normal, so there shouldn't be any serious brain damage. There may be scarring on the frontal lobe, but only time will tell how serious it is. Do you have any questions for me at this point? Wow, that was a lot of information to digest. I thought about it a bit and asked, that is, roughly speaking, everything could be worse, but I may have problems with short-term memory. How long will it take to recover? Well, Matt, it all depends on the degree of memory loss, if any. Have you had difficulty remembering recently or before the accident? Doctor, I remember everything after waking up, but I only have fragmentary images from the accident. I think the last thing I remember was the morning of that day. This is great news, Matt. If you are having trouble remembering little things in the coming weeks, please let me know right away. I'll go out now to hand you over to the physiotherapists. He shook my hand, said goodbye to my mother, and left the office, closing the door behind him. It was definitely a relief. I was a little worried about my head, but judging by what he said, I was the luckiest man in the world. I decided that when I was bored, I would read about head injuries at home. I will have enough time for this. Well, that sounded pretty positive, don't you think? Mom asked. Yes, it did. Now let's see what they say about the rest, I replied. After a few minutes of waiting and my mom telling me how loud my dad snored last night, the door opened again. Thank God for small miracles. A rather tall and attractive woman entered the room and sat down at the table. She had to be at least 180 centimeters tall, and her figure was so athletic that it looked like she was involved in athletics or something similar. She was wearing what looked like a sports uniform or cycling suit. She introduced herself as Dr. Swinson and said that she would be treating me in the coming weeks. Matt, let me warn you right away, this is not a quick process. Although you are in better shape than many patients who have been immobile for months, you have a lot of work to do. Do you have any questions before we start? I think I'll ask the same question that many people ask you. How soon do you think I will be able to walk without assistance? I asked. It largely depends on how hard you work and how quickly your muscles recover from atrophy. Under favorable conditions, you may be able to walk without support within a few weeks, but I can't give any guarantees. From my experience, I can say that the speed of recovery largely depends on the patient's willpower. This recovery is not only physical, but also mental, so we need to make sure you give it your all. Understood. This sounds reasonable. Then let's get started. Certainly. First, we need to assess your current capabilities to understand what you need to focus on first. With that, she stood up, opened the door, and asked my mom to take me to the main therapy room. There were all sorts of exercise equipment, ropes suspended from the ceiling, wall bars, and even a massage table in the corner. We stopped in an area where there were mats on the floor, and the doctor asked if I could get out of the chair on my own. I tried, but I needed my mom's help to get up. She asked me to try to stand without support, but I knew I probably wouldn't be able to. She suggested we try, and I tried to stand for a minute before I started to wobble, and my mom rushed to catch me so I wouldn't fall. The doctor asked me to lie on the mat on my back. Mom helped me lie down, and various tests of mobility and reaction, as she called them, began. Basically, I had to press my feet and hands on her palms, move my neck, and perform other simple actions. It took almost an hour, and by that point I was absolutely exhausted. The doctor asked my mother to help lift me back into the chair, and together they sat me down. She then told my mom to take me back to the exam room while she took notes. A few minutes later, she returned with a big smile on her face. I have good news for you, Mr. Jordan. You are in pretty good shape and should recover well from intensive care. You have to put in a lot of effort, but I didn't find any signs of nerve damage or motor problems. Your main problem is atrophy. Your muscles have been left motionless for too long, and now they need to get back into shape. Fortunately, although your coma seems long, it was relatively short. If you were in this condition for a year or more, You would need years of therapy to start walking again. She paused to let me digest what she had heard, and then continued. You will need intensive therapy 3 times a week, as well as daily exercises at home. Here are some basic exercises you can start with today. In the coming days, we will teach you more complex ones that you can do at home. She handed me a stack of stapled sheets and asked, do you have any questions for me? No, I think not yet. But if they show up, I'll call you, okay? Certainly. It was a pleasure meeting you, Matt, and I look forward to working with you on your recovery. With these words, she stood up, shook our hands, and opened the door. She came to the front desk and asked to sign me up for 3 sessions a week for the next month. After that, my mother and I went home. My mood has improved a little. At least my health was improving, which was not the case with my marriage. We returned home and I settled into my room. I started looking through the booklet of exercises and realized that I could do most of them. I started with leg exercises, lifting them and bending them at the knees. After a few minutes, the muscles began to ache, and I switched to exercises for the arms, but soon they began to protest from the tension. After that, I lay down and took a little nap. Later, my mother came into my room to tell me that she was leaving and the children would be home from school soon. I just nodded and went back to sleep. I woke up to the sound of a ringing phone. I heard Sydney's daughter pick up the phone, and a moment later, she screamed loudly, "I hate you," and hung up the phone forcefully. I guess it was Jennifer calling. I would need to talk to my daughter about her anger, even if I felt something similar myself. Sydney came into my room to check how I was feeling, and then went to the kitchen to prepare dinner. She's not a professional chef, but she can cook much better than I ever could. She said that she learned this from cooking shows and from her mother. She helped me to a chair at the dining table and continued with dinner. I asked my sons if they needed help with their homework, but they said Sydney had already helped them with that. This touched me deeply. My little girl is being forced to grow up too fast because of everything that's going on, and it hurts to know that there's nothing I can do about it. All the children sat down at the table, and we ate a very tasty beef casserole that Sydney had prepared. The conversation around the table was light, which is something I think we've all been missing lately. Stephen said he received a warning from his math teacher for talking in class, but nothing serious. Tommy mentioned that he had a tryout for his school's baseball team soon, right after spring break. Sydney asked how therapy went. Guys, it looks like I'll need help for a long time, but there's good news. I hope I'll soon be able to walk without support. As for everything that is happening at home, I can only say one thing: we will move day by day. We will support you, Dad. You can count on us, Sydney said with a smile. Thank you, dear. It really means a lot to me. Okay, let's clean up this mess. Or rather, you clean it up, and then maybe we'll watch a movie to order, I suggested. All 3 stood up and began clearing the table. I was so proud of them at that moment. If anything could help me get through this, it would be them. After the kitchen was cleaned, the kids helped me settle into a lounge chair, and we watched the new earthquake action movie that had recently come out as a family. After the movie, Sydney helped me up to the bedroom, turned away while I changed into my pajamas, and then walked me to the bathroom. Thank God she didn't seem embarrassed, although I certainly was. I slept relatively peacefully that night, although my head was still swirling with unresolved thoughts. The rest of the week went pretty much the same. Jennifer came home twice to spend time with the kids, and I could see that she wanted to talk to me, but there were simply no words between us. I told her that maybe we should talk soon, but to be honest, I was afraid of it. Mom drove me to therapy sessions, and Dr. Swinson continued to give me everything I had. The muscles hurt terribly, but she claimed that the progress was excellent. On Saturday, when Jennifer came to visit the children, she took the boys out to lunch and shopping. Sydney said she didn't want to go, and I noticed that Jennifer was offended by that. Part of me felt gloating about this, but another part just felt sad. She learned to pay the price for her weakness. After Jennifer returned with the children, she asked me to talk. The children went outside to give us some privacy. Sydney, as usual, asked if I was okay, and promised to be back soon to check on me. She will definitely be a great mom someday. Matt, I miss you so much. You should know this, and to know that I love you very much, she began. Jennifer, do you think I don't miss you? We were supposed to grow old together. We were so good for each other, and I thought you would always be there. Where did I go wrong? You're not wrong, Matt. God. How could you think it was your fault? I just don't understand. Was Jim really that good, or what? No, hell no, she exclaimed. You are the only man I have ever loved. You are the only one I want to be with. And I'm so ashamed that I allowed him to make me doubt myself. She fell silent, and I decided to give her time to continue. Matt, I'll be completely honest with you, and I hope you'll believe me. Jim came to the hospital again, and I told him to leave me alone, or I would call the police. What did he want? Another good sex? I asked with irritation. Just hearing his name made me shudder. He said he had loved me for a long time and hoped that I felt the same. I told him to go to hell and never come near me again. I just wanted you to know about this. There was a pause, after which she spoke again. What about us, Matt? Do we have a chance? Do you think we could go to a counselor? I'm on the edge and have no idea how to live without you. I was starting to get angry, and the desire to deal with Jim only intensified. Jen, if you want to see a counselor, go. Maybe this will help you figure out why you let another man have sex with you. As for me, I'll think about it. It might help me, but it might be a waste of time. And about Jim, if you see him again, tell him I'll kill him if he doesn't leave you alone. She almost cried, but managed to hold it in. If you organize something, I'll try it, okay? She looked up at me with slight hope. Okay, honey, she said as she left. I love you. Bye. I heard her get into the car and drive away, and the children returned to the house. Dad, when will Mom come home? Asked Tommy. I don't know, guys. Maybe we'll go to a counselor and see if that helps. I'm not sure yet, I replied. Spring break started the following week, and the kids were home most of the time. Stephen stayed over at a friend's house one night, and Tommy said he wanted to go out with a girl another night. Mom still took me to therapy, and Dr. Swinson continued to work diligently with me. Each session was painful, but there seemed to be progress. I could now stand to go to the toilet instead of sitting down. It's sad that I started measuring my recovery in such small ways. On Thursday of that week, Jennifer called me. She said she had started seeing a counselor and asked if I would be available to see him next week, Tuesday. I agreed, but made it clear that if I didn't like it, I wouldn't return. I had a lot of time to think, and I began to think about what to do with Jim. He deserved to get his ass kicked or something. I still couldn't believe he could do something like that. Apparently, he really was so obsessed with my wife that he was ready to destroy our long-standing friendship. The next week, I went to see a consultant, and, as expected, it was a woman. She was about 50 and looked very professional. Her name was Dr. McGregor, but she asked to be called Rose. I felt a little awkward in her office, but she wasn't aggressive or trying to push. Sydney came with me but stayed in the waiting room while I spoke one-on-one with the doctor. Mr. Jordan, she began, I asked your wife to stay outside the door today so I could talk to you alone. Do you mind if we get straight to the point? Great. Your wife told me her side of the story, but I'm interested in your version. Please tell us about your marriage before the accident. How did you meet your wife? Well, Jen and I met in college. I think she already told you. We had mutual friends, and over time we started dating. Then I thought that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. She is still like that, although, as you understand, I'm not happy with her now. After we started dating, I just knew that she would become my wife. We got along great. We had so much in common. I have never felt so alive around someone, and I have never met a woman as easy to talk to as she is. The doctor was writing something down in her notebook, looked up, and asked the following question. How was your intimate life in those days? Have you had sex often? Yes, quite often, I answered honestly. We were both young and in love. She wasn't too eccentric, but we always made sure each other felt good. The doctor took notes again, which was starting to get a little annoying. "Mr. Jordan." "Just call me Matt," I interrupted. "Okay, Matt, can you tell us more about your life after college and marriage, after we graduated from university?" "No, I take my words back. We got engaged when we were still final year students, but decided to wait until we finished our studies. We had a big church wedding, and it was probably one of the best days of my life. After a fabulous honeymoon on the islands, we came back here to be together." "Thanks for your candor, Matt. I understand that this is not easy for you to talk about, especially with everything going on. The session is coming to an end, but will you agree to come back in 2 weeks with your wife? I have a few more individual sessions with her before I want to get you two together." "I don't mind. Doctor, tell me honestly, do you think we have a chance to fix everything?" "It all depends only on you two. I will do my best to create the conditions for constructive communication, but ultimately the decision must be made by you and your wife." I thanked her and left with my mother. Now I could walk most of the way on my own, but my mother still held my hand. The next 2 weeks went largely the same way. I attended therapy sessions, talked to the kids and mom, and Jen came in several times a week to see the kids. Sydney continued to help me a lot, but she was still cold towards her mother. I told her that she shouldn't let Jen and I's problems affect their relationship. I think she felt almost as betrayed as I did. We had several sessions together, but unfortunately I made no progress in forgiving my wife. Perhaps we won't succeed. A few more weeks of therapy and my visits were reduced to weekly sessions to monitor my condition. I was looking forward to finishing all these exercises, although the therapist said that I would have to continue to practice at home for a while longer. All I knew was that the day couldn't come too soon because I wanted to get back to work so bad. Jennifer. After several sessions with Dr. McGregor, I began to realize that perhaps I had always been weak-willed. She asked me a lot of questions about my past, even before I met Matt, even before college. I told her that my parents were caring people, and I felt like I had a pretty good childhood. My best friend at the time was like my protector. Her name was Rachel. She was the kind of girl who was always ready to stand up for you. I was devastated when she moved out in ninth grade. High school was a difficult time, but I made it through. Later, I dated a couple of guys, but only slept with two of them. Both turned out to be unimportant lovers, but I chalked it up to age and lack of experience. I was never available or easy in college, even before I met Matt. I admit my friend Tammy often dragged me out to parties, but I thought I was good at blowing guys off most of the time. Although I was not a saint, I still had close relationships with some of them. But none of them really grabbed my attention. When I met Matt, we hit it off immediately. Unlike most other guys I knew, he wasn't persistent in trying to get me into bed. I think that's what I liked most about him back then. He really seemed like a nice guy. I took the first step myself and asked him out on a date. I've always felt like I'm a go-with-the-flow person, but maybe the problem is that I'm easily manipulated. I used to think I was good at turning down people I wasn't interested in, whether before or after marriage. But maybe that was only because I knew what they wanted. As for Jim, I thought I did a good job of stopping him after he kissed me for the first time, but I missed all subsequent signs of his intentions. How could I? I thought I was smart, but for some reason I just followed what Jim wanted until that fateful night. After another week of sessions, I experienced a new fear. I'm 2 days late, and I was paranoid until I took a pregnancy test at my parents' house. I stopped taking the pills after Matt had the procedure and would have died if Jim got me pregnant. After 10 agonizing minutes of waiting, the test came back negative. To be sure, I made an appointment with my gynecologist, and tests confirmed that I was not pregnant. When the result came back negative, I felt relief for the first time in a long time. There would be no hope for our marriage if I got pregnant. I wouldn't be able to get rid of the pregnancy, and Matt would never raise a child knowing who his father was and under what circumstances he appeared, and I wouldn't blame him for that. I still had no intention of sleeping with anyone else, so there was no need for the pills. I told my mom what happened, and she just hugged me. I came to our home to visit the children as often as I could, but I really wanted to go back and be with my family. Despite several sessions with Matt, I felt like we were no closer to being reunited. I began to get depressed and even thought about death. The only thing that stopped me were the children. I couldn't hurt them any more than I already had. I missed one joint session because I was at work at the hospital. There was a bus accident, and we had a lot of people seriously injured. When I returned home to my parents and called the doctor, the time for our session had already passed. I tried to call Matt to explain, but Sydney said he didn't want to talk to me. The next day, I came home to see the kids and explain again, but Matt barely listened to me. He said that he wanted to believe me that I was at work, but still decided to check my story. Everything went very badly, and I returned to my parents. A week later, my world collapsed. A bailiff came to my parents' house and handed me divorce papers. Jim, by now you probably want to find me and give me a hard time. Believe me, I'm starting to understand that you are right and that I deserve it. Let me try to explain my position before you pick up a baseball bat. Matt and I have been friends since elementary school. If he was going somewhere or doing something, I was nearby. We went to our high school graduation together. Well, not exactly together, but on a double date. We even had a graduation party together. We were not siblings, but I sincerely considered us brothers in spirit. After finishing school, we both entered the same university and even lived in the same room together. We hung out often, and by the end of our studies, we calmed down and began to communicate in the same company. It was during this period that he began dating Jennifer. I was a little jealous because she took up all of his time. Over time, as I began to get to know her better, I also began to develop feelings for her. Of course, nothing could happen because she was busy, but damn, she was amazing. Life went on as usual. They got married after graduating from university. I thought I had come to terms with it, but I couldn't get her out of my head. I went to work for my uncle in insurance. His agency primarily served business clients, but he had a few personnel policies. I invited him to expand this market with my participation, and he agreed. We started doing home, auto, and life insurance. Anyway, I dated women, but never found one. I had to accept the fact that Jennifer was forever out of my reach, but I kept comparing her to everyone I dated. Now, looking back, I realize I was a little obsessed. You are probably already thinking, come on, this is obvious. I met a rather interesting woman named Margaret, but she preferred to be called Maggie. She thought her name sounded too formal and, in her words, like an old woman's name. We went on dates several times until one night we ended up at her house. It was a passionate night, which is written about in novels. We were lying in bed, hugging each other, when the door swung open and a huge, extremely angry guy burst into the room. I was stunned and began to grab my things, realizing that the situation was clearly out of control. "Who the hell are you? Why are you sleeping with my wife?" he shouted. I turned to Maggie. "Wife, are you married? What the—" Maggie screamed. "Don't kill him, otherwise you will be placed. Please stop." He took a step back, and I took the opportunity to get up and run out of the house. Thank God for adrenaline, otherwise I would have simply been killed. I ran out to the car, almost naked, and drove to the hospital. I told the doctors that I had been beaten on the street and was examined in the emergency room. Of course, I started screaming at them, but they explained that the damage was too serious and that surgery might be required. Fortunately, surgery was avoided, but tests confirmed that I would most likely never be able to have children. This was fine with me because I didn't really want them, but that's not the point. After this incident, I decided to be very selective in my relationships. Years passed, but no matter how hard I tried, I could not forget Jennifer. Soon Matt had an accident. Of course, I went to help as best I could. At that point, I had no intentions of doing anything with Jennifer other than being there for her. However, after a few weeks of hanging out with her and her family, I began to envy Matt again. I really wanted what he had. I invited her to go out to get away from all the problems, and I was simply intoxicated by her presence. That's when I kissed her for the first time. At that moment, I realized that I wanted to be with her. I really wanted Matt to get better, but if he hadn't regained consciousness, I would have tried my best to make her love me as much as she loved him. She responded to my kiss, but immediately after that she asked me not to do that again and to take her home. When I dropped her off, she told me not to call her for a few days and not to try to kiss her again. A few weeks later, I managed to persuade her to go out with me again. I really wasn't lying to her when I said there was supposed to be another couple with us, but it just so happened that they canceled their plans. It turned out to be good luck for me. We had a nice dinner and a movie together, and then, well, you get the idea. She was better than I could have imagined. Right after that, she must have felt guilty because she quietly asked to be taken home. I gave her a ride, and since then she hasn't called me again. I heard that Matt had woken up, but I didn't know how I could be near him now. If he found out, I'm sure he would kill me. A week later, I couldn't stand it and decided to see Jennifer. I couldn't get her out of my head. It seemed to me that I loved her, so I went to her work. I waited for her near the parking lot until she came out and approached her. She got really angry and told me to leave her alone and never come back. She even threatened to call the police. I screamed to her that I needed her as she got into the car and drove away. After this rejection, I returned to my work and daily life. Honestly, I didn't know what else to do other than avoid them both and hope for the best. Do you see? I told you that you would want to beat me. After all this, I probably deserved it. Matt. After all this intensive therapy, I was still not fully recovered, but I felt much better. I called my old boss and asked if I could go back to work. He said that the place was reserved for me and I could start when I was ready, but he advised me not to rush. I was glad to have something to do again to take my mind off my thoughts. On Monday, my mom came to see me again after the kids went to school and took me to therapy. This would hopefully be my last week of regular visits, after which only monthly check-ins would remain. Dr. Swinson said I recovered very quickly and that I was very lucky. When I returned home, I thought about her words. I truly have 3 of the best kids in the world who helped me when I needed it and who love me. I have wonderful parents who have supported me and love their grandchildren as much as I do. I had a wife who, until recently, was the best thing that happened in my life. I finally decided to move on and filed for divorce, even though it was hard for me. The documents were given to her at her parents' place, not at work. I didn't want to ruin her life, I just wanted to start a new one for myself. She and I were supposed to grow old together, spending time with our grandchildren, and, if we were lucky, our great-grandchildren. I still wanted it, but I couldn't get over the fact that she had fallen for Jim's tricks. I always knew that he was a womanizer, but we made a promise to each other a long time ago, not to interfere in each other's relationships. I know he had a hard time with that married woman a few years ago, but I told him then that in time he would find the one. I never meant it to be my wife. I realized that if I wanted any closure from this situation, I would need to talk to him. He and I will never be friends again after all this. If I was honest with myself, I wanted to know if it was entirely his fault or if Jennifer was more involved than she was telling me. It's sad how cheating destroys a person's trust. Jim worked for his uncle, so I thought it would be safer to meet him at work rather than, say, at a bar. After my mom left for the day, reminding me of the family dinner on Saturday, I changed clothes and ate a sandwich. I tried to think of what to say so as not to get lost in my thoughts on the spot. To be honest, I wasn't even sure if he knew I already knew. I decided to play the fool first and then get down to business. The ride took several minutes, but it felt like only 10 seconds. I parked in front of his office and gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Whether I was prepared or not, it was harder than I thought. I got out of the car and walked towards the door, going inside. The secretary, not knowing me well, but knowing that I was Jim's friend, pressed the intercom. "Jim, you have a visitor." He opened the door and stopped for a second when he saw me. I tried my best to look like I didn't know he slept with my wife, but I wasn't sure how well I did it. I smiled and said, "Hey, buddy, Do you have a minute to talk? Sure, Matt. Give me a second, and we can have some coffee. Okay, I'll wait outside, I replied. By this point, just looking at him, I was beginning to seethe with rage and wasn't sure how long I could maintain the appearance of ignorance. A minute later, he came out, and we walked together to a small coffee kiosk on the corner. We grabbed coffee and headed back to the office. In the backyard of the building, there was a seating area with a picnic table where we sat down to talk. It was nice to see him look so pale and nervous. He fidgeted in place, but didn't say anything. I tried to control myself when starting a conversation. I just wanted to thank you for helping my family. I heard you came to visit while I was in the hospital. Why didn't you come back when I woke up? He looked me straight in the eyes and answered, You're welcome, Matt. I tried to help as much as I could. Since you woke up, I've been really stuck at work, but I kept meaning to stop by. At that moment, I couldn't stand it. I jumped up, threw hot coffee on him, and shouted, You fucking bastard! How could you? Before he could understand what was happening, I struck him. If I see you again, I will kill you. I hope you rot in hell. I must say that this brought me some satisfaction, but on the way home, this feeling gave way to disappointment. I still needed my wife, but it seemed like that was no longer feasible. Jennifer. When I received the divorce papers, I was depressed. I really hoped that counseling would help, but apparently it didn't. My parents tried to console me, but they knew that such an outcome was possible. That night, I stared at the bottle of sleeping pills for a long time. Luckily, at that moment my father came in, just like when he was a child, and kissed me goodnight. This kiss reminded me that I have 3 children whom I also kiss goodnight. What if they find themselves in the same situation in the future? Could I be there to support them? How selfish of me to even think about that. That night, I promised myself that I would survive no matter what. If it's over with Matt, I have to find a way to move on. The next evening, I called the kids and told them how proud I was of how they were handling it all, especially Sydney. I promised that I would come to them the next day. Sydney began to warm up to me a little, even telling me that her relationship with her boyfriend Jared was getting serious. This helped me get out of my depression. A little I wanted to be there for my daughter. We talked for a while, and I promised that the next day we would spend time with just the 2 of us. The next day I came home to see the kids and talk to Sydney. Matt went away with his mom for a while so I could spend time with the kids. The boys told me about school and how they spent the weekend. It was nice to be with them, but I wanted it to last longer. I told the boys that Sydney and I needed to talk alone, and we went into her room. She closed the door and sat down on the bed next to me. She smiled, and I took her hands. Sydney, I'm so sorry you've been through so much pain lately. I want you to know that I will always be there for you and love you no matter what. And I'm also very sorry that you had to help your father, because it should have been my job all along. You are an incredibly strong young woman. Mom, I've been angry with you for a long time. Sometimes I still get angry, but I realize that I love and miss you so much more. I don't want to hate you anymore. With these words, she began to cry, and we hugged. I would be lying if I said I didn't have tears. We both needed this moment. After a minute of hugging, we released each other and smiled. This was a good step towards restoring our relationship. So, dear, you said that you and your boyfriend are serious. I don't want to pry into your personal life, but I know that you are old enough to possibly become sexually active. How is everything going? I asked carefully. Well, Jared's mom said he doesn't plan on going to college, but maybe wants to join the army. She paused, as if she was considering what to say next. Go on, Sid, you can tell me anything. I promise I won't get angry. She looked me in the eyes and said, Mom, he asked me to marry him. I was shocked. Part of me was incredibly happy for her, and part of me was shocked that she was talking about marriage at such a young age. This was an unfamiliar situation for me, and I understood that I needed to act carefully. And what did you answer? I asked. I said yes. I know that we are still very young, but I love him very much. I hope you won't be mad at me, Mom. I just know that he is the one, she blurted out quickly. Aren't you pregnant by any chance? Sorry, this is just such a shock for me. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Have you already told your father? My thoughts couldn't keep up with the words. She gave me a look that clearly said, of course not. No, I'm not pregnant, Mom, and I haven't told Dad anything yet. I don't even know how to start a conversation with him. I'm surprised I was able to tell you this. Well, I can't say I'm thrilled that you're getting married at such a young age, but if you really love him, I'll support you as best I can. I hope you're going to wait until after you graduate. Of course, Mom. He suggested waiting until June or July to have a summer wedding. Can you help me plan everything, Mom? What could I say? I knew she was too young to take such a big step, but I also knew that my daughter was smart enough to know what she was doing. I trusted her. If I had said no, it could have ruined our relationship, which was just beginning to heal. If I agreed, it would mean approving her early marriage. It was a real choice between two evils. I will help you, but I have conditions. You have to promise that you will still go to college like you planned and get an education. I don't want you to give up on your dreams, and I also want to be with you when you tell your father about this. I'm sure he won't be happy, so I'll help you deal with this mentally. I know I'm not his favorite person right now, but I'll have to accept that. What do you mean, Mom? She didn't know about the divorce. Sydney, your father filed for divorce. I'm going to give him what he wants, even if I don't want it. He and I just can't move on, so I'll have to accept it and try to be there for you kids. Tears welled up in my eyes again. I thought I had already learned to restrain them, but I couldn't. I was overwhelmed with emotion. The news of my daughter's wedding came at a time when my own marriage was collapsing. Sydney leaned over to hug me, and I felt a little better knowing that things were working out between us. Mom, I love you, she said, burying her face in my shoulder. I love you too. We stood up, wiped our tears, and laughed a little about acting like sentimental girls. God, it was so nice to hear her laugh again. I felt a small but important victory. My daughter no longer hated me. I said goodbye to the children, saying that I loved them and would visit them in a few days. Sydney promised that she would tell her father about the engagement when I was around. I promised not to tell him about it ahead of time. The next day Matt called, but only to talk to my parents about something. He didn't want to talk to me. It still hurts me. I still wanted him back, but life had to move on. If only I could show him how much I miss and need him, maybe I could change his mind. But it seems that forgiveness was impossible. The next day, I arrived at the house after work and Matt was still there. Apparently, Sydney asked him to stay until I got there so she could talk to both of us. I had an idea of what she was going to tell him, and I was a little nervous for her. Before Sydney could start talking, I noticed that Matt's knuckles were badly bruised. As someone who works in the emergency room, I immediately realized that he had hit someone hard. Matt, are you okay? I asked worriedly. I'm fine. My hands just met an idiot who stole something from me. He deserves it. I understood perfectly well who he was talking about. If we weren't heading towards divorce, I probably would have laughed. Are you in trouble? Do you want me to look at your hands? No, I'm fine. As for troubles, I haven't heard anything yet, so I don't know what he's talking about. He paused and looked at me, as if wondering why I still cared. Didn't he understand? I still loved him so much that seeing him sick was unbearable. He continued, actually, Sydney said she needed to talk to us, so here we are. What's going on, Sid? Well, Dad, I graduate in a little over a month. Jared proposed to me after graduation, and I said yes. What? He asked, sitting up dumbfounded. Welcome to the club, I thought. At least I wasn't the only one who was shocked by this news. Dad, I know you probably think we're too young, but I love him, and he loves me too. He treats me well and will never hurt me. I saw the gears turning in his head. Are you pregnant? He asked. She laughed. No, Dad, I'm not pregnant. It's funny because my mom asked me the same thing 2 days ago. He turned to me with a furious look. Did you know about this? Yes, Matt, I did. She told me 2 days ago when I came to see you, but we haven't talked lately, so how could I tell you? Besides, she asked me to wait so she could explain everything to you. She loves you very much and wanted to make sure you weren't disappointed. Well, I don't really like it, but I don't have a choice, right? She's an adult now and can do whatever she wants, right? Daddy, don't be mad at me. I really want you to walk me down the aisle. If you can't accept us, I'll probably do it without you. Sydney, I never said I wouldn't do this. I'm shocked and really think you should wait, but I still love you very much. If you say you are in love with him, I believe you and wish you happiness. Of course, I'll walk you down the aisle. Have you already chosen a date? You're waiting until you graduate, right? Yes, Dad, we are waiting for June or July, I think. He was smiling at her now. I sincerely wished that it was me who made him smile. After our conversation, he went into the yard to play football with the boys, and I stayed with my daughter, discussing the upcoming wedding. For a while, it felt like we were a family again. As much as I wanted it to last longer, I knew it was temporary. Matt, my 18-year-old daughter is getting married. Damn, that made me feel old. I wasn't too thrilled with her decision to get married so young, but I had to trust that she was making the right choice. She said she loved him, and I believed her. I trusted her, so I said I would support her choice. She wanted me to walk her down the aisle, and I knew I would never let my girl down. As for my life, things went on as usual, but that was all. I felt like I had taken revenge on Jim, but there was an emptiness inside. The lawyer told me that if Jennifer does not contest the divorce, it could be formalized in 3 to 4 months. Deep down, I really didn't want to divorce her, but I felt like I had no choice. Call me stubborn, but I thought about it a lot and saw no other option. The next day, my mom took me to my first monthly checkup with my GP. We were silent for a couple of minutes of the ride, until she apparently couldn't help herself. So, are you really going to get a divorce? Matthew, I was so hoping you could figure it out. Wow, she used my full name. Now she was serious. Mom, I love her, but I still feel betrayed. How do I know she won't do it again? I know she loves me, but is that enough? Sorry if it sounds harsh. I'm just trying to explain how I feel right now. Okay, that's fair, she replied. Think about it. Your Uncle Larry went through something similar. Perhaps you should talk to him about this. Uncle Larry? Didn't he divorce Aunt Sue? Did she cheat on him too? You'll have to ask him, but I think yes. Perhaps he can give you advice. I know he's still hurting, even though it's been 3 years since their divorce became final. Mom was right. It might be worth talking to someone who has been through something similar. Okay, I'll call him when we get home. Thanks for the advice. The rest of the trip was uneventful, and we arrived at our appointment a little earlier than our scheduled time. After dropping me off at the building, my mom said she was going to run some errands and would be back at the end of my session to pick me up. I sat in the lobby scrolling through emails on my phone. My former boss wrote to me to say that my request to work from home starting next week had been approved. He added that he hoped I would return to the office soon because everyone was missing me. At this point, Dr. Swinson came out to invite me into the therapy area. The room was unusually quiet, with only one person working out on the leg machine with his therapist. Today, we will simply do a little review of your progress and, if necessary, make adjustments to your home program. How are you feeling, Matt? She asked. Pretty good, thank you. I'm already moving on my own, almost without the help of my family. Wonderful. I have to say, you don't look like you've been in a coma recently. Your body has recovered amazingly well. Shall we begin? Was it just me, or was my therapist flirting with me? Maybe I just haven't had enough of this for a long time. She took me to the parallel bars, and we worked on walking for a while. She then asked me to lie down on the mat and do some leg raises and abdominal exercises. Let me tell you, these exercises hurt no matter how fit you are. She asked me to roll over onto my stomach to do reverse leg raises. Her hands seemed to be a little lower than necessary. Of course, my treacherous body made itself felt. When we finished, I said I needed a minute before I stood up. She gave me time and then asked me to turn over and sit up. Fortunately, by that time I was almost back to normal. She may have noticed something, but didn't say anything. She just smiled a little, got up, and walked away for a minute. When she returned, she helped me stand up and handed me a card. It had a phone number and address. We're almost done. I look forward to seeing you in a month for a follow-up appointment. This is my home number and address if you need anything. Call at any time for any question. She had a very curious expression on her face, and I really felt like she was trying to flirt with me. To be honest, she was a beautiful and nice woman. In other circumstances or over time, I might have fallen in love with such a woman. When I went out into the hall, my mother was sitting there. Seeing her, it was like I woke up. She stood up, and we walked out to the car, saying almost nothing to each other. As soon as we got into the car, she scolded me. "You're not even divorced yet, and you're already flirting with another woman. With your therapist, Matthew, seriously?" I was dumbfounded. "Mom, what are you talking about? I didn't do anything with this woman. Yes, she is very beautiful, but I have never cheated on Jennifer. What makes you think there is something between us?" "I see. I saw it in her eyes when you walked towards me. This woman wants you." "Mom, believe me, nothing happened and will not happen to her." She didn't say much else and just drove me home. When I left, she said goodbye, and I went into the house. Now I felt terrible thinking about another woman while I was still married. What does this say about me? We're not divorced yet. Every man notices beautiful women, but I still felt guilty. Mom knew me too well. I needed a distraction so I wouldn't paint myself into a corner, so I turned on my laptop. I connected to the corporate network and started checking emails. My account was disabled a few weeks after I went into a coma, but now it has been reactivated. I saw several letters dated in recent days, and many messages sent even before my access was blocked. I decided to start with the letters sent before my coma to see if anything important had happened. Among them were several messages from colleagues wishing a speedy recovery, several from our suppliers with whom we occasionally collaborated, and also some from our clients. One of the letters shocked me. It was from a lawyer and concerned a proposal for a pre-trial settlement. Why didn't my wife or family say a word to me about this matter with the truck driver who caused the accident? Did anyone have contact with a lawyer while I was in a coma? I'll have to ask Mom and Dad about this. Having finished reading the old letters, I moved on to the new ones. Among them were several requests from potential clients in need of our consulting services. Two of them were from large corporations who, in their words, were looking for an honest assessment of their network. Obviously, we were recommended by former clients. Another request came from a small business that needed help setting up a point-of-sale system, and the last one came from an accountant we sometimes worked with. He did our bookkeeping for a small fee. I've responded to a few emails and written to colleagues suggesting that they tackle some of these things while working from home over the coming weeks. My boss sent a general email to everyone expressing his joy that I was back at work and feeling better. After that, I unplugged and went to do my daily exercises. I really gave it my all, and then my whole body ached terribly. I filled the tub with hot water, added some lavender oil, and climbed inside. As I lay in the water, I thought about my situation and my family. In a few years, our children will probably move away. The sons were already discussing their plans for college, and the daughter was getting married and going to university the following year. I thought about Jennifer and our plans for the future once the kids moved out. We were going to travel and visit places on our bucket list. Most people have a list like this, but it was especially important to us. We even wrote it down on a piece of paper that was still hanging on the refrigerator. We planned to stay in this house until we retired and then moved to a small cottage in the country. We even looked through the options online and chose the ones we liked. She often laughed at me when I chose houses with huge windows and a view of a pond or lake. "With such large windows, you know, it will be difficult for us to hide our love affairs," she joked. "Honey, who will see us in the wilderness?" I usually answered. Realizing that the water was starting to cool, I decided it was time to get out. I got out of the bath, dried myself, and put on my tracksuit. Just then, the children returned from school, animatedly telling me about their day. A few minutes later, Jennifer called. I almost ignored the call, but decided that I would not deprive her of the opportunity to talk to the children. I wanted to let you know that I will be with you in an hour. I think I can stay longer, and we could have a family dinner. How do you like this idea? She asked. She didn't mention the divorce papers. I felt torn, but decided it would be good for the kids to spend time together as a family. Okay, I think that's a good idea. I'll tell the kids you'll be there soon. Bye. Bye, Matt. After hanging up, I wondered what the hell I was getting myself into. Didn't I file her divorce papers, and now I was letting her come over for dinner? It was a strange feeling to talk to her on the phone and not say, I love you, like we had done since the beginning of our relationship. Deep down, I missed it. Now I feel even more confused than before. I think we were both trying to cope, and it would have been helpful for the kids to see us acting like adults. The last thing I wanted was to add more negativity to their lives. After I hung up, I remembered that I had promised my mom that I would call Uncle Larry, so I dialed his number. We agreed to meet for coffee the next day. I then left a voicemail for the lawyer from the letter, asking him to call me back when he was in the office. Lastly, I called my mom to see if she knew anything about the lawyer's letter and settlement offer. She said this was the first time she had heard about it. According to her, only representatives from the insurance company from my work contacted her. Jennifer arrived later in the evening, and we had a wonderful dinner that Sydney made spaghetti. The boys told us about their upcoming sports matches, and Jennifer and I promised to come and support them. Sydney talked about Jared and how much she was looking forward to graduation and the wedding. When Jennifer arrived, I did ask her about the letter from the lawyer. She said they did contact her once, but then didn't call her back. She left a letter from them somewhere in her home office. I was very glad that we had this dinner. It was like the good old days. But when dinner ended and Jennifer started to leave, I again felt torn between what I wanted and what I needed to do. We all said goodbye to her as she left, and the kids gave me a big hug as she left. Damn, will it ever get easier? Jennifer is helping with wedding planning. Today was supposed to be the first day of a new life. I woke up with a positive attitude. To start my new path, I decided to help my daughter prepare for her wedding. Every weekday, I would pick Sydney up after school to do some planning, and every weekend we would go shopping or at least look around. In addition to work and helping my daughter, I continued to go to individual sessions with Rose. Although my sessions with Matt did not produce much results, I thought that I should continue counseling. Perhaps she can help me understand my weaknesses so I can work on becoming stronger. I wanted to remain a part of Matt's life, even if we were no longer together, and I hoped that he could see my efforts. Perhaps he will find the strength to forgive me. Sydney and I spent several evenings discussing big issues. We decided to leave the small details for later. The first step was to choose a date and location for the wedding and reception. She said she and Jared wanted to have an outdoor ceremony, hoping for good weather. We thought it would be possible to put up tents or pavilions in case of rain. They haven't decided on the exact date yet, so we opened the calendar. Looking through June, we stopped at the 11th. It was the week after graduation, and Sydney said there was no reason to wait any longer. She later explained that the date falls between Memorial Day and Father's Day, so she wouldn't have to juggle her wedding with other important events. I said it was a great date. June will most likely have nice weather, and it won't be as hot as July or August. Moreover, this date was close to my wedding anniversary, which was June 14th. It took 2 days to discuss the location. At the end of the second evening, Sydney decided that she wanted to have a wedding on the lake. She spent a lot of time there as a child and had fond memories of the place. Moreover, it was a beautiful place with picturesque nature around. By the end of the first week of planning, we had a preliminary guest list, a date and location selected, and several catering options. Over the weekend, I took Sydney to a pizza place where I met her fiancé, Jared. We had only met a few times before, and then only for a few minutes, so this was the first opportunity to really communicate with him. This evening benefited everyone. Matt had time to be alone with his sons, and I was able to improve my relationship with my daughter. I'd love for us to spend time as a family, but I was willing to settle for restoring my relationship with Sydney to begin with. We continued planning the following week as I had another session scheduled with Rose on Monday. I was still trying to understand what prompted me to cheat. Of course, I could make excuses to myself, but there must be some specific reason why everything happened so quickly. When I came to my next session with Rose on Monday, she was as friendly as always, but this time she asked me some rather difficult questions. This session turned out to be the hardest we've ever had. Jennifer, over the last few sessions, we have been trying to understand what led to your actions. Today, I want to delve into other aspects of your life and personality. I think this may help you feel like you are making progress because you have expressed a strong desire to understand yourself better. Okay, Rose, I really want to figure it out. I understand that Matt may never forgive me, but in order to move on, I need to forgive myself. So far, I haven't been able to do it. Rose started by asking questions about my past relationships, my past jobs, and even my marriage before I had kids. She asked what Matt meant to me and also asked some questions about my current job. We discussed several other aspects of my life, and at the end of the session, she expressed her opinion. Jennifer, I can't say for sure yet, but I get the impression that part of your problem has to do with how dependent you are on other people. You work in an emergency department where everyone is counting on you. However, in all other areas of your life, you seem to rely heavily on others. You depend on your husband not only for love and support, but also for decision-making and planning. When you were younger, it seems you behaved similarly with your boyfriends, letting them decide for you. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it might have something to do with the way you handled Jim. Many women are used to being paid attention to and can handle it without problems. But you seem to have the feeling that without Matt by your side, you were left with no armor to protect you. I sat there, digesting her words. Did I really allow the men in my life to make decisions for me? Could my dependence on others be the reason I couldn't resist Jim? God, am I really that dependent on others? I never thought about it, but now it seems logical. I usually just follow everyone's lead and rarely speak my mind or take the initiative unless absolutely necessary. Probably the only place where I know exactly what to do and how to do it is the hospital. I think this is a good place to end today's session, Jennifer. You will need to think about your behavior in everyday life and decide if you want to change anything. There's nothing wrong with relying on others, but sometimes it pays to be able to rely on yourself. See you next week, okay? Yes, thank you, Rose. She walked me to the door, and I left, thinking deeply about what she had said. If I did rely too much on others, it could influence my decisions. When I returned home, Sydney was already waiting for me. We continued to discuss the menu for the wedding reception and finalize the guest list. We needed to send out the invitations as soon as possible so that everyone could make it to the wedding. Sitting at the table with her, I thought about my situation again. If my dependence on others is really that strong, I need to learn to cope better on my own. I decided to start taking a closer look at my interactions with others to understand how much they define me. Returning to my parents' house in the evening, I again saw divorce papers on the table. And at that moment, I made a decision. If Matt really wants to end this stage of our relationship, I will not interfere. I was the one who made a mistake, and although I would like to take everything back, I understood that he might not forgive me. The next day, I took the signed documents and left them at his house when I left. I needed to start seeing our old house as his house if I was going to really move on. However, returning home, I could not hold back my tears. At night, lying in my bed, I cried, feeling how part of my life was crumbling. After the next few sessions with Rose, I began to feel like I was regaining control over myself. But just when I started to think things were getting better, the police came to my parents' house. "Ma'am, my name is Officer Smith, and this is my partner, Officer Dunleavy. Can we come in?" asked the tall one. Yes, sure. Officer, what happened? Is something wrong? I asked, feeling anxiety rising inside. My mother came out of the kitchen after hearing the conversation, looking equally puzzled. We would like to ask you a few questions. First of all, when was the last time you saw Mr. Jim Harding? My mind began to race feverishly. What could have happened? I hated Jim more than ever, but I was immediately filled with fear for Matt. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to put him in harm's way. Officer, the last time I saw Jim was a few weeks ago in the hospital parking lot. He came up to me and we exchanged a few words before I drove home. Did something happen? I asked, trying to remain calm. We'll talk about this a little later. First, we need to complete the questions. When was the last time you saw your husband? I saw him yesterday when I was at our house. You see, we now live separately, but I come every day after work to help my daughter prepare for the wedding. I'm usually there until late and then go back to my parents. What time did you arrive home yesterday? You said after work, right? Around what time? Was your husband at home all this time? I finished work around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, stopped at a gas station, and got home around 4:30. Yes, Matt was home all evening. I stayed for dinner and then left at about 10 p.m. Now please tell me what's going on. The officer looked at me and finally responded, Mrs. Jordan, we found Jim Harding dead in a hotel room. Time of death was approximately 5 o'clock yesterday evening. We have already spoken with your husband, and he stated that he was at home all evening, as were you. Thank you for confirming his alibi. My mind seemed to freeze. Is Jim dead? Even though I hated him, this news shocked me. Many questions immediately began to swirl in my head. Who could have done this? Why? And most importantly, how could this affect our family? Matt, how do you describe my Uncle Larry? He was a short man, barely over 5 feet. He didn't look particularly strong, but was slightly plump, with his hair beginning to thin. Uncle Larry was very kind to everyone in the family, although it was difficult to carry on a conversation with him due to his somewhat introverted personality. I decided to go see him to talk about his divorce from Aunt Sue. No one in the family fully knew what happened between them, except for the official version of irreconcilable differences. If my mother told me to talk to him, then he knew what it was like to be in my situation. When I arrived at his house, he was already outside, mowing the lawn. He invited me inside so we could talk. Hi, Uncle Larry. Thank you for agreeing to meet. My pleasure. So what brings you to me? I left with more questions than I came with, but at least he was able to understand my situation a little. Perhaps I should go back to that consultant, Rose. If not her, then maybe someone who can help me deal with all this crap I've been through. Jennifer said she still goes to Rose. Maybe that's helping her. Another thing I had to take care of that day was to visit the lawyer I called. He allegedly represented the trucking company that the driver who hit me worked for. I would have thought that my insurance company would have contacted me about this by now, given that they are covering the cost of my treatment. It's hardly cheap. I arrived at the lawyer's office and waited in the reception area for about 10 minutes until a very neat-looking man came out of one of the doors. He introduced himself as Derek Montrose and invited me into his office. When we sat down, he immediately started talking. Thank you for coming, Mr. Jordan. I represent United Trucking, the company that employed Mr. Worth, the man who fell asleep at the wheel and hit you. Sorry for asking, but why hasn't my family heard of you before? All I know is that I received an email at work. My parents said no one even called them, and my wife claims you didn't answer her calls. Sir, we sent several letters to your home address, and I personally came to your house, but no one was there. He seemed to be trying very hard to connect. Okay, I'm here. What offer do you want to make me? I recommend discussing this with your lawyer, but here's a quick summary. United Trucking is offering to cover all of your medical expenses, plus a one-time cash payment of $750,000. In addition, we are willing to compensate for any further therapy costs or loss of income associated with your injuries. Okay, I'll consider this offer. When do you need an answer? I asked. Contact our office within a week or two. There is no rush. Here's a copy of the proposal and my business card, he said, handing me a folder with documents and a business card attached. I left the office and went home. That night, when Jennifer came to talk to Sydney, I tried to be kind to her. She smiled, but was mostly engrossed in wedding planning. She had such a beautiful smile. It's funny, but now, looking at her, I'm not angry, just a little sad. I wish everything was as it was before. The next morning, I called Rose's office to make an appointment. I was sure they didn't expect me to come back, but she didn't reject me. We agreed on 2 o'clock in the afternoon so that I would have time to return home before the children arrived. I spent the morning cleaning the house and even did a little work on a project for our accountant, who wrote to me. He needed to update his tax software. I sent him information about various products and their costs. Of course, he will receive a discount because he works with us. In the afternoon, I went to Rose. She smiled warmly as she welcomed me into her office. When we got settled, she asked why I came. "So, Matt, how can I help you? Do you know that since our last session together, I have been seeing your wife regularly?" she asked. "Yes," she told me. "I came for myself, if possible. Of course, I will try to help you. What do you want to talk about? Does this apply to your situation with your wife?" She asked the obvious question, but the conversation had to start somewhere. I, I, I would like to turn back time and avoid this accident, but this is not my main problem. I really don't want a divorce. I want to forgive her, but I just can't do it. Do you realize that in this sentence you said "I" several times, but only "we" once? Perhaps you are taking on too much, or you need to take a broader view of the situation. Why do you think this problem is only yours? I thought about her words. What does it look like from the outside? What if we look at our situation through the eyes of children? I sat in silence thinking about this and realized that I needed to reconsider the way I was looking at the problem. "Rose, I think you're right. I was so focused on my own problems that I didn't even think about others. I'm still not sure how to look at this from Jennifer's point of view, but maybe talking to her will help. That would be a great start. Communication is one of the main pillars of a successful relationship, and it sounds like you and your wife need to work on it. I think our time is coming to an end. Want to come back next week?" "Yes, I think that's a good idea. I'll call tomorrow to make an appointment," I said. Once again, I left with more questions than answers, but at least I felt like I was taking steps toward some kind of solution. She made me think about how I behaved. Of course, I was hurt after her confession, but did I really listen to her? Jennifer and I had so many wonderful years, and maybe I should have talked to her more. Only time will tell if open conversation will help. I returned home just before the children arrived from school. They all greeted me as usual and ran to their rooms. I was sitting in my home office, doing research for one of my projects, when there was a loud and insistent knock on the door. I got up to open it and saw something completely unexpected. 2 uniformed police officers stood on the threshold. My first thought was, damn, Jim must have filed a report against me for assault or something. "Mr. Jordan, I'm Officer Smith, and this is my partner, Officer Dunleavy. We'd like to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind. Can we come in?" The short one, Dunleavy, just stared at me. Of course, officers come in. I walked them to the sofa. "Would you like to get coffee?" I suggested. "No, thank you, sir. We just need to ask a few questions," Smith replied. "Okay, I'm ready to help as much as I can. What are we talking about?" I asked. "Where were you yesterday afternoon?" asked Smith. "At home, of course. I'm still recovering from the coma, but now I feel much better than in the first days after waking up. I hope to be back at work next week if my therapist allows it. Did you leave the house during the day or evening?" "Yes, around 10 in the morning I went to the store. After that, I returned home, did some exercises, and took a nap. I woke up around 3:30, worked a little remotely in my office, and then the kids returned from school. Am I in trouble? Do I need a lawyer?" "Sir, you can have a lawyer if you want, but for now, we are just asking questions to find out what happened yesterday." "Do you want to call a lawyer?" asked Smith. I shook my head, and he continued, "Where were you at about 5 in the evening yesterday?" At 5 o'clock, we had dinner. My wife came over to help my daughter with her wedding planning, and we had dinner as a family. After dinner, I watched TV and went to bed. You said that your wife came. She doesn't live with you? Dunleavy asked. I turned to him. Yes, but we are separated now, so she lives with her parents. What's going on? Smith looked at his partner, who nodded and began to explain. Sir, last night we found your friend Jim Harding dead in a motel. We interviewed everyone at the motel and his place of work, and his secretary mentioned that you visited him a few days ago. Is that so? Yes, I came in to chat. I wanted to know what happened while I was in a coma. Were there any disputes or disagreements during this meeting? Dunleavy asked again. No, we just talked over a cup of coffee, and then I returned home. I had a physical therapy appointment, and I didn't want to miss it. I didn't kill him, but I wasn't going to admit our quarrel either. I hoped they didn't know anything about it. Okay, you've answered all our questions for now, but please don't leave town until we get this case sorted out, Smith said. No problem, I'll be here. They left, closing the door behind them. Damn it, Jim is dead. What did he do to get shot at the motel? Perhaps caught again with another man's wife. I had no answers except that my former best friend was now gone. I had mixed feelings about his death. Despite what he did to my wife, he used to be the best friend I ever had. The next evening, when Jennifer came back to help with the wedding preparations, she asked me about it. She said that the police came to her too. I assured her that I had nothing to do with this. I wasn't too sad about his death, but I could never do something like that. I don't even have a weapon. I went to see Rose 2 more times, and both times our conversations went in the same direction as the first. I began to realize that perhaps I was part of the problem. I seemed to have a selfish streak and thought only of myself too often. My family meant more to me than anything in the world, but if I worry too much about myself, it can hurt them. Something had to be done about this. The last weeks of school flew by, and then Sydney's graduation day arrived. Of course, Jennifer came too, as did both of our families. They would not miss such an event, even at the end of the world. We sat watching Sydney take the stage to receive her diploma, alternating between applause and screams of joy as she shook the director's hand. It seems that someone even had tears in their eyes. I sat next to my sons on the left, and Jennifer sat to my right. As we were watching the graduation ceremony, she suddenly took my hand. It was nice, and I let it go until we had to get up again to congratulate Sydney. When we sat down again, she no longer reached for my hand. After the ceremony, she came up to us, and we all hugged her. Several of her friends came over, and we congratulated them too. After that, we went home where we had a small party in her honor. I grilled, and both sets of Sydney's grandparents helped with the rest of the food. Jennifer cooked one of the dishes, so there was enough food for everyone. It was a wonderful day. Sydney was the real star of the party, easily interacting with everyone. It was clear that she was in seventh heaven after graduation. Jard was by her side most of the time, which was probably why she looked so happy. All I knew was when I looked around, I saw my family, the people who meant the most to me, and they enjoyed the holiday. It really was a happy day. After everyone helped with the cleaning, the guests began to go home. Jennifer stayed a little longer to discuss the final details of her wedding with Sydney, and then she too left. When I went to bed, I felt both happy and sad. It was a wonderful day. Everything seemed as it should be. The next morning, life continued. My baby had just graduated and was getting married in a week. I still can't believe it. Just yesterday, she was learning to ride a bike and playing with a tea set in her room with Jennifer. I was also invited to several such tea parties. I smiled, remembering those happy times. Before I knew it, the week flew by, and it was the day before the wedding. At the rehearsal, I seemed to say everything correctly. When the priest asked, "Who gives this woman in marriage?" I answered as expected, "Her mother and I." Now all that remains is to say it correctly at the ceremony itself. That evening, we had a great dinner at a local steakhouse. They reserved a private room for us, and the food was excellent. There was a lot of laughter at dinner, and before we knew it, it was time to go home. Sydney arranged to spend that night at her mother's so she could prepare for the big day in the morning. I was on edge, even though I had only one simple task: walk down the aisle and say a few words. I hoped the rehearsal would help. It's funny, but after thinking about it, I realized that I was doing this solely for the sake of my daughter. I love her so much, and all this is for her, not for me. I thought again about my selfishness. When I realized this, I decided that I would do everything right for her sake. The next morning, my sons and I dressed in rented tuxedos, and we went to the park. The morning was simply magnificent. The sun was shining, and not a cloud in the sky. This day couldn't have been better for a wedding. When we arrived, many guests had already gathered. Some sat on chairs placed on the lawn, others stood at tables with coffee and snacks. Closer to the beginning of the ceremony, everyone took their seats. My wife was already sitting in the front row, so I knew my darling daughter had to be ready. I waited for her to appear while the rest of the wedding procession walked slowly down the center aisle. And then she came out of the preparation tent. My legs almost gave way. She was incredibly beautiful. There is no other way to describe her. The last time I saw something this beautiful was when Jennifer walked down the aisle towards me at our own wedding. I felt like my breath was being taken away, and I couldn't help but smile broadly. "Are you ready for this, Dad?" she asked. No, of course, I was not ready for my daughter to grow up and start a new life. What kind of father is even ready? "Yes, honey. I love you very much," I said instead. The wedding march started playing, and we walked down the aisle together. Having reached the altar, the priest asked his question: "Who gives this woman in marriage to this man?" "Her mother and I answered. Thank God for small miracles, I said everything correctly. I took my seat, and Sydney joined her fiancé in front of the priest. The ceremony has begun. The priest spoke some beautiful words. They exchanged traditional wedding vows, and finally they said, "I pronounce you husband and wife. You can kiss the bride." Throughout the ceremony, Jennifer quietly sobbed and held my hand. It was an amazing moment for all of us, and it was a pleasure to be with her. After the ceremony, we lined up to shake hands and hug the guests as they congratulated Sydney and Jard. Then everyone went to the rented banquet hall, and it was full of guests. There were many toasts in honor of the newlyweds, with wishes of happiness and love. Jennifer made a short speech and made a toast. Many doubted this marriage, mainly because these two are so young. But I see two lovers in front of me, and to me that's all that matters. Sydney, I love you both and wish you a wonderful future. Here's to Sydney and Jard. Everyone applauded and raised their glasses of champagne. Of course, there was clinking of glasses and shouts urging them to kiss, which they did with pleasure. I remembered this moment from our wedding, and how it was both wonderful and a little awkward every time someone decided it was time for us to kiss in front of everyone. I decided it was my turn to say a few words and stood up to make a toast. The speech was not prepared in advance. I spoke from my heart. It seems Jennifer did the same thing too. No father wants his little girl to grow up, but it still happens. When Sydney first told me she was getting married, it was a complete shock. I thought, how can she be in love? She's only 18. Your whole life is ahead. But looking at her with Jard, I realized that she made the right choice. She will spend her whole life with the one she loves and who loves her back. Jard, you need to take really good care of my daughter. I wish you both the best life you can imagine. Here's to the happy couple. There was a loud chorus of hooray to the newlyweds. After dinner, dancing began, organized by the DJ. The bride and groom performed their first dance as husband and wife, and they truly looked like they would be together forever. The next song was for the parents. It was This Kiss by Faith Hill, one of our favorite songs. I don't want no more heartbreak. I don't want to cry again, no. I don't want to learn from mistakes. Hello, baby. Oh no, goodbye. But you make me feel like a rocket, flying straight through the sky. This is your love for me. It feels like this. Centrifugal movement. Eternal bliss. This is the key point. This is impossible. This kiss, unstoppable. This kiss. We were both on the verge of tears. We stood so close and everything seemed so right. If only this song and this moment could last forever. Cinderella told Snow White, "How can love get so lost? All I wanted was a white knight, with a kind heart, a soft touch, a fast horse. Take me to the sunset. Baby, I'm yours forever." Her head was resting on my shoulder, and I could feel it getting a little damp. Yes, I admit, I also left wet spots on her shoulder. This is your love for me. It feels like this. Centrifugal movement. Eternal bliss. This is the key point. This is unthinkable. This kiss. Unsinkable. This kiss, this kiss. The song continued to play, and we danced. All too quickly, the melody ended, replaced by a fast song. But we still held each other tightly, moving slowly, as if we were the only ones in the room. I leaned towards her ear and said quietly, "We need to talk. I want to show you something." She just nodded, still leaning on my shoulder, and wiped her eyes as we left the dance floor. She ran into the bathroom, and I headed to the car. When I returned, I waited at the door of the women's room until she came out. She started first. "You said you wanted to show me something?" "Yes, I want to." "Here," I replied, handing her the envelope. She opened it and, covering her mouth with her hand, screamed. "This is a package of documents for divorce. I never signed them or filed a lawsuit. I informed the lawyer that I no longer needed his services," I said. She looked up at me, full of tears. "This is true. Matt, what does this mean?" "Exactly what you think. Jennifer, you have always been and remain my whole life. I've thought about it a lot and realized that I can't let you go." She was still crying, but she threw herself into the warmest hug I had ever felt. We hugged for what seemed like an eternity until we heard a cough. We turned around and saw children smiling at us in the doorway. 3 years have passed since that day, and I still consider myself the happiest person on earth. If I have any regrets, it's only one. I almost missed the best thing in my life. I realized that we all make mistakes, and some of them are big ones. After speaking with our attorney, we reached a settlement with the trucking company for almost $2 million. After all the payments, we have enough money left to use for the benefit of our family. We decided that this money would be used to help our children and grandchildren in the future, such as paying for college or buying houses. We also bought a cottage outside the city after selling our large house in the city. Jim's murder remains unsolved as far as I know. We sent his family a condolence card, mostly out of respect for his parents, who were kind people. But I will always wonder who might have been involved in this case. My daughter is about to graduate from college next year with a nursing degree, and her husband just returned from his last tour of duty in Afghanistan. He received an honorable discharge and, thanks to his military training, found a great job at a major airline repairing airplanes. Sydney promised us that once they were settled, they would start working on giving us grandchildren. My sons have both gone to college and make us proud every day. Both are dating girls, so we'll see where that takes them. At the moment, they say they are happy. As for Jennifer and I, we still make passionate love as often as we can. After that wedding, we went on a cruise to start over. It was one of the most romantic experiences of our lives, and we enjoyed every minute. We both continued to go to Rose for a while longer to make sure we learned to talk to each other about everything, no matter what. We promised each other to always be honest and open, even in the most difficult moments. We also reaffirmed our promise to remain the only ones for each other, and I truly believe Jennifer. She is such a wonderful and caring woman that it is impossible not to love her. In general, life is going well, and now I understand that my uncle was right. My life is much better with her than without her. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.